Ladies and gentlemen, my proud privilege to present to you Mr. Nikhil Rao to deliver the 11th K.C. Verghese Endowment lecture on the theme, The Future of Aerospace. Over to you, Mr. Nikhil. You want to call him? Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm happy to be here. It's an honor to be here. So I just want to start off with thanking Dr. Verghese, Dr. Fiedler, and the whole Verghese family, and Group Captain Vijay Kumar. Thank you so much for inviting me and letting me be a part of this amazing celebration today. You know, the last time I was in such a setting in front of a lot of people, you won't believe this, but there was a person sleeping right at the front. And I am, don't worry, that's not going to happen today, because I've requested my wife to stay awake this time, because there's no technical formula in this presentation. So we're going to talk about the future of aerospace, but before we do, I also want to encourage all of you to expand maybe from what domain you work in. Because I've met a couple of you who are working in textiles. Guess what? Airplanes have carpets and seats with cloth. There are some of you who sleep on foam beds or memory foam beds. That has to do with space. That's where the invention came from. Some of you watch Dish TV or have farming backgrounds or farming families which benefit from remote sensing. So our lives are completely intertwined with aerospace. So as you sit here and think about the future of aerospace, also think about how that's going to immediately impact your life and in your business and your families going forward. Now, Jim Lovell was the commander of Apollo 13. Hope maybe some of you have seen the movie or know about the crisis. He said that there's three kinds of people in this world. People who make things happen, people who watch things happen, and people who wonder what happened. Okay? And certainly, Dr. Elizabeth Verghese, Dr. K.C. Verghese are people who make things happen. And undoubtedly, they're pioneers, philanthropists, as well as patriots, as you mentioned. So the other part is that, while I believe both of them are born leaders, many of us don't have that privilege. So I truly believe that leaders are not always born, they can be made. And since 1956, MMA has been creating leaders that are making our communities, our lives, in India better. So a really wonderful community, because I'll say leadership, management is a science. Many of you have studied Deming, right? You take notes, you measure, and you improve, and that's what managers do, or supervisors do. But leadership is an art. And you're navigating a VUCA world, which is volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous, now more than ever. And it is this community in this room and the diversity of ideas that will inform and help you get through whatever challenges that you will face going forward. So really appreciate the MMA's existence and making a huge difference in our community. So let's move forward and talk a little bit about the future of aerospace. Now, while we're talking about the future, it's really good to begin in the past. So some of you may have read Dr. Verghese's autobiography called Wheels and Wings. If you haven't, that's fine, but he loved wheels, cars, and airplanes, his two passions. So cars were not invented when the penny farthing bicycle was there. Okay, the cars were invented about 15, 20 years later. So was a bicycle as we know it today. But why are we talking about the penny farthing bicycle? This was the standard from about 1860 to 1890s. And as all of you sitting here can tell, this is an awful design, an absolutely awful design. And during that 30-year period, people died or got broken bones and terribly injured using this bicycle because they would fall off, even at a slow, if there was no brakes. Women could not ride this because back in the day they had, this requires shorts or pants, and women did not wear that type of clothing. So it was not inclusive, it was unsafe, and people accepted it. And it makes me think about, what are some of the things that we do today that our grandkids will say, I can't believe you did that in 2024, right? But this was the world. Now, The other reason I'm starting here is that just about 20, 30 years in, about by 1890, the safety bicycle came into, became the norm for transportation, the bicycle as we know it today. And that produced, because it was a booming business, that produced two gentlemen by the name of Oliver and Wilbur Wright, who went on to invent the airplanes, right? People have been chasing the dream right from before even Leonardo da Vinci, that everyone, human beings wanted to fly. No one could crack it. But without the bicycle, we may not have had the airplane today, because during this time, you had people with immense amount, you had Samuel Langley who had millions of dollars in those days to develop an airplane, and you had scientists, teams of scientists from the best universities, Harvard and stuff, trying to figure it out. They couldn't. It took two bicycle mechanics to figure it out, because the controls of aircraft and the balance of aircraft are very much like riding a bike. Okay, while it's simple to us now, it was revolutionary back then. So let me ask you this question. Why am I here then representing the Boeing company and not the Wright aircraft company, Wright Aviation? They invented the airplane. Okay, so while the airplane was invented in 1903, the gentleman on the left, Bill Boeing, did not fly on an actual aircraft until July 4th of 1915. And on that very first flight, fell in love, not with a woman, but with flying and aviation. And he was just evangelized from that moment on. And less than, maybe about 12 months, 13 months later, on July 15th of 1916, he founded the Boeing Aircraft Company. It was called Pacific Air Products, but the Boeing Aircraft Company, Boeing as we know it today. 1916, right? Again, the airplane had been invented in 1903, but what made Bill Boeing a futurist? He had a dream. When he took that first flight and he fell in love, he knew immediately that he wanted to share the magic of flight with the whole world. Sometimes you've gone and eaten a mithai and you said, oh, everyone's got to try this. This is so delicious. I want you to try it. I want you to try it. Similar to that with aerospace, right? He wanted everyone to experience the magic of flight. And I'm using that term intentionally, magic, because I, as an aeronautical engineer, I wake up every morning just in wonderment and amazement. So let me ask you this question. If you leave MMA tonight and you look up in the sky and you see 50 elephants flying above your head, would your mind be blown? It absolutely would be. But that's what a 747 is. It's the same weight as 50 elephants, and now we don't even look up when you hear an airplane fly overhead. What it is magic. So he wanted to share the magic of flight with everybody. And the same goes for Dr. K.C.G. Verghese. He also was smitten by the aviation bug, and he wanted to share. And like I said before, there are people who make things happen. The most important thing about a futurist, like both of them, is they not only decide that the world should be this way, they go do something about it. I'm sure all of us sit in the weekend and complain. It's like, if only this wasn't there. Yeah, that's fun to do. But are we doing anything about it? These two gentlemen took action to make their dreams come alive. So this is, again, just something to be enchanted by for both of these gentlemen. Now, why do we fly? Huge number of reasons, right? But primarily for me, it's really to connect, protect, and explore our world. When you think about connection, it is so vital because there's so much conflict and turmoil in the world. However, when you have a friend who is Korean or German, and you realize they're just like us. Yeah, we might speak a different language, or there's so much beauty in those other countries and places as well. Then you realize that while we can be different, we have a lot of similarities as well. It connects cultures, improves human understanding. It also delivers humanitarian aid that I've got on the bottom, right? So, Boeing C-17s were delivering COVID masks and supplies all over the world, including India. to help during the crisis. So hugely important. Group captain can tell us all about protection, and you mentioned the word deterrence, but there are, while we'd like to live in a utopia, there are bad people who want to do bad things, and we need to protect all of us good people from those threats, right? So protection is and deterrence is really key. But for me, the part that I love most is the exploration part. We have products that are mapping, believe it or not, we know more about space than the ocean on our planet. So we have products that are mapping the surface of the ocean. We have products that are unmanned, autonomous submarines, essentially, submersibles we call them. And all the way, of course, to outer space. You all know about, moon landings and everything else like that. So, and that journey that exploration and passion is going to continue because every time we explore, we learn more about humanity and ourselves. And that's going to continue. But here's another thing that I'd like for you to think about. Some of the people who are going to be living or putting people on Mars are probably, if you have kids, they're probably your kids, at home, or your grandkids at home, or your nephews and nieces at home. They're going to be a generation that expands human beings living on the moon, Mars, other places besides Earth. So very, very exciting. While it's really fun to talk about all these possibilities, here's a stark reality. Only 1 in 20 people have actually flown on aircraft. Every year, 3.5 billion people fly, but it's people like maybe us who are taking 5, 20, 30 flights a year. But the majority of people, 99% of people, think about, your communities, have never been on an airplane and never experienced the magic and the wonder of flight. So as we think about the future of aerospace, that's who I think about. Not the 1 in 20, that's important, of course, but I'm thinking about the 19 other people who have not had the joy and the experience, and what can we do for them? For example, Boeing has a huge initiative. We actually have a specific leader assigned for accessible flights. That means people with disabilities. People don't realize this, but some of the wheelchairs that they use, motorized wheelchairs, cost $8,000 US dollars, right? A lot of money. Or how do they use the restroom? How people with mobility issues, even elderly people, trying to use a stow bin overhead to put their bags or take out their bags. And we're thinking about all of those people and trying to create more inclusive flight. And not just in the aircraft, but also thinking about the whole experience in the airport all the way into the aircraft as well. Now, well, I'll go back here. I want to talk about a couple of things because I didn't explain the picture over here. So the other part that's really, really important to companies like Boeing is that we have to think about sustainability now than the previous century, right? So for example, how many of you know that 95% of a 787 is recyclable, completely recyclable? It's amazing, but then again, the 5% we still have opportunity. This product here is a transonic truss-braced wing. We're thinking about not only new designs, but what is the new supply base, the new production system, the new propulsion technologies, and that will produce future products like this, and how will the end of life look? End of life is really, really important. Like I mentioned, the recycling of the aircraft, but there are literally satellites in space that don't have a plan, and so this just becomes space junk and becomes dangerous for astronauts and so on and so forth. You got to rethink everything continually in this business and really, really focus on sustainability. So let me start with fleet renewal, because this is a tremendous place of growth in India, especially, and you, Dr. Verghese, mentioned the 500 aircraft that Air India has bought, and so on and so forth. So, and you also mentioned that India is the 3rd largest market for commercial aircraft as well as defense products. Okay, it's almost $77 billion US dollars a year. A lot of money being spent, rightfully so. Because by 2070, India will be the largest economy in the world, overtaking the US. So India, when I relocated here, when I first met my engineers here and the team here, I told them there's never been a better time to be in India. And I will say this to you next year, and the year after that, and the year after that. So, and that's really, really true. It rings true. So from a fleet renewal standpoint, huge market and growth, and back to the 1 in 20 flying, many of you will experience the joy of flight. But we have to think about the whole infrastructure, like I mentioned, because getting on the flight is maybe tougher than the flight itself, right? Going through the security line and all of those other challenges. So we have work to do there. On the efficiency front, we do have, Indigo and Akasa and other aircraft. Our fleet in India is about 700 aircraft strong, and it'll grow to, it'll quadruple in the next 20 years. So, we'll have almost 2,500, 2,400 aircraft in just 20 years in India. However, for the 700 aircraft that we have today, the fleet utilizes 15% more fuel than airlines that are operating in Western countries. 15% more fuel. And so, saving the planet, but also the money and all of that stuff for the airlines as well. So Boeing is obviously helping airlines, regardless of their product, really focus on efficiency and better fuel usage of their portfolio of products. Renewable energy is very interesting. I think, we talked about it. Mr. Mahalingam mentioned it at the beginning in his opening comments. The energy infrastructure is slowly decarbonizing, becoming less reliant on fossil fuels. However, aviation can be a little bit more challenging than simply, the auto rickshaw switching to battery or CNG and things like that, as many of you might know. I want to break it up into a few segments. For the ultra short haul, like we have air taxis now emerging, including in Chennai, we got E-Plane and a couple of other companies. They are going to be electrically powered. There will also be some hydrogen power for those ultra short haul segments, at least until by 2030. By the end of this decade or decade and a half, we'll see that change. For the medium and long haul travel, though, we still will rely on hydrocarbons at least for another 2 to 3 decades. However, what is Boeing doing about it in the meanwhile? So for the last 20 years, we have developed something called sustainable aviation fuel, which is an alternative plant-based biofuels that we mix. So we provide that to multiple airlines to use sustainable aviation fuel. It's a sort of renewable air resource because they're plants that we manage, think of it like managing forests, and we produce renewable energy. That is a little bit cleaner, a little bit cheaper, and so on and so forth. So that's going to be the bridge until some of these new technologies scale and become more safe, because hydrogen and things are still not safe for aviation. What you see on the final table there in terms of advanced technology, the picture on the top is an MQ-25. We have multiple products, the MQ-28 also, that are autonomous military vehicles. That means they communicate with air traffic control, they taxi themselves in the airport, they take off, they perform their mission, they come back. This MQ-25 is a aerial refueling, so it can coordinate with another airplane and refuel that airplane. No pilots. So we've been, again, Boeing's been doing this for, we've got military customers, we've been doing this for decades. Now the challenge is, how do we transition some of that autonomy into more civil commercial aviation? And I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. The image on the bottom is a partnership that we're exploring with the Indian Navy. This is called the Wave Glider, and it is an autonomous, again, robot, liquid robot, which sits somewhere, below the surface of the water, but obviously not too deep, and it provides reconnaissance for the Navy, right? It can listen for submarines and so on and so forth. So it's got some good defensive capability there. So let's go back and talk about autonomous flight and how we're scaling it into commercial aviation. So what you see on the top right-hand side here is a picture of Wisk, which is a subsidiary of Boeing, which we have our 6th generation autonomous air taxi here. There are many companies that are ahead of the game in air taxi, but they always have a pilot in the loop. This is completely autonomous. And the FAA just, weeks ago approved, we cleared a major hurdle and regulatory hurdle, and this is moving forward. This is moving forward. So the beauty of Boeing is it's 108 years old, and that's a rich legacy. But what I remind my engineers every day is that we are writing history today. The kinds of products that we're producing, we're writing history today. It's a living history because, again, 100 years from now, there'll be books written about the stuff that we were working on today, right? What people only dream, we actually get to do every single day. So it's an exciting place to work. That said, when you're with a 108-year-old company or maybe a university or organization, complacency, there's a risk that complacency can set in, right? So that's why I wanted to share this picture because we're not competing with Airbus anymore. We're competing with Apple and Google, and because everyone thinks they can build airplanes. And so the market is very disruptive. You have a lot of new players, right? And you can't take anything for granted. Raise your hand if you use a compact computer. Nobody, okay. Who has a Kodak camera? We all did once upon a time. Those companies don't exist. So how do we ensure that Boeing's going to exist? In 1916, we had our centennial. 2016, we had our centennial. 1916, we were founded. And during that time, our CEO board, hosted people from a variety of fields. People who were working on sci-fi, movies, scripts, Star Trek, people from MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and Harvard, and so Nobel laureates, people who were really thinking about the future, and we defined what 2116 is going to look like, right? 100 years from 2016. What is the world going to look like? What Boeing's place in it? How are we going to continue leading in the world 100 years from today? And we did a similar exercise like that in India that I was a part of, which was about 2047, India's centennial. So we know what 1947 was, but in 2047, what is India going to look like and what's our place in it? And by the way, it was very enlightening because we learned that there's things that we better start now. Because while it feels like 2047 is a long way away, many of the IAS offices, the infrastructure that's being defined today is going to be a boon or a hurdle for us by 2047. So very, very enlightening. That's how Boeing is always maintaining its edge and thinking forward. Here is the outlook for India.